reversal of the sorrowful conception. Genesis 3:16, unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow shalt thou bring forth children. So God, the very first thing that he does is he curses the serpent, and then he says to Eve that he is going to greatly multiply her sorrow in conception. And that's a perfect reversal of what we see in the book of Revelation. We see the rapture of the church and the punishment of Satan and his angels. And in Jeremiah 20:18, wherefore I came forth out of the womb to see labor and sorrow, that my days should be consumed with shame. The first consequence of their sin in the garden was the sorrow of conception. Throughout the Bible, a theme of conception can be seen with Jacob and Esau and Rebekah, Pharez and Zerah with Tamar, wombs being made barren, Michal who mocked David, old wombs bringing forth seeds such as Sarah and Abraham, Elizabeth and Zechariah who were the parents of John the Baptist. And since Eden there has never been a birth which has not been into shame under the cover of sin, apart from the Messiah, of course. The birth of the church into heaven, which is the rapture, will be the first stage reversal of the curse of sin into glory. It is logical that the reversal of birth into shame thus appeals to a future birth into glory. So we see God doing things in Genesis, and he reverses those things in the book of Revelation. We should expect this reversal to be manifested in such a way appropriate to the circumstances. That is a major event. And the Revelation chapter 12 sign is both the theological and the practical application of this event. The universe is declaring a birth. If there is to be a birth into glory, then there needs to be a womb. And the Revelation chapter 12 sign with Jupiter, the largest planet in the solar system and the second largest constellation after the serpent, a virgin in the heavens, can be considered befitting and appropriate to that event. So the fall of the universe occurred when Adam and Eve fell into sin. Now the universe is declaring the end of that sin by means of the birth of the church, and doing it in such a way that it is represented by the heavenly bodies and the planets themselves. The birth of Pharez, Genesis 38:27. We see Tamar, she plays the harlot with Judah and then has these children. And we see the same kind of thing happening with the Jews playing the harlot with God. Then the time came for her to give birth. There were twin boys in her womb, and she was giving birth. One of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, this one came out first. But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out. And she said, so this is how you have broken out? And he was named Pharez, which means breaking. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out first, and he was named Zerah. And of course, the harlotry being played by Tamar with Judah, it shocks our inner finer feelings to see Christ's lineage interwoven with such abhorrent degradation as we have in this chapter. But we are all sinners. From Adam to the very last person born in the millennial kingdom will all be sinners, and only Christ is without sin. In the lineage of Christ we see wretched men, and we're all wretched. Only he is the one who is not wretched. And Tamar played the harlot like Israel has played the harlot. The rule of primogeniture, or the firstborn, is voided again. Neither Isaac, Jacob, Judah, nor Pharez are recognized as the firstborn, yet God's promises are carried out through them. So the Jews were given God's promise first, and the Gentiles came second. So it's the Gentiles that are birthed first, if you will. Yet the Jews were really the ones who came out first. So we see a perfect model of the church being born into heaven before the Jews are redeemed. And of course, having come out of the birth canal first leaves a bit of a mess for the second baby to come out. So there is that bloodiness involved as far as Israel is concerned, unfortunately. Judah was a Jew, Tamar a Gentile, and thus the parentage of Pharez can be looked upon as the foreshadowing of the fact that both Jews and Gentiles were to share in the blessings of the gospel. The model of Sodom destroyed in Genesis 18:9. And they said unto him, Where is Sarah thy wife? And he said, Behold, in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, and well stricken in age, and he ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of woman. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, After I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord, being old also? So she has a bit of a dig at Abraham as well. And the Lord said unto Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I of surety bear a child, which am old? Is there anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed I will return unto thee, according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. And in the chapter before that, he actually confronted Abraham before. He said, And I will bless her, and give her a son also. Yea, I will bless her, and she will be the mother of nations, kings of people. And Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old, and shall Sarah that is 99 years old bear? Interesting that they tell you the dates there exactly. And Abraham and Sarah, the patriarchs of Israel, are told that they will give birth prior to Sodom being destroyed. The promise came to them. Sarah was 99, Abraham 100 years of age, and the Balfour Declaration, a promise to Israel, is 100 years old. Lot, the cousin of Abraham, is a Gentile in a perverse nation about to be destroyed. Abraham, the Jewish promise, saves Lot, not of the promise. Lot, the Gentile, is removed before Sodom is destroyed. Jesus pre-incarnate is not at the destruction of Sodom, so it's obviously Jesus and the two angels. The two angels go off to destroy Sodom, and Jesus isn't there. And after the destruction of Sodom, Isaac, the first generation of promise, would be born. So obviously in the millennial kingdom, that's going to be the first generation of the promise born to Israel. Although Abraham was not part of the destruction of Sodom, he bowed before Jesus and acknowledged him as Lord. So we know that Israel obviously haven't done that yet, and that's going to be the reason why they're part of the destruction of Sodom. In Genesis and Revelation, God sets up thesis and antithesis, or antithesis and thesis. Good in Genesis and bad in Revelation, and sometimes bad in Genesis, such as the sin, and the reversal of that in Revelation. So Genesis first, and then Revelation second. Genesis, sun to govern day. Revelation, no need of sun. Genesis, darkness called night, no more night. Waters called sea, no more sea. A river for earth's blessing, a river for new earth. Man in God's image, man makes image to Satan. Entrance of sin, end of sin. Curse pronounced, no more curse. Death entered, no more death. Cherubim protect garden. Cherubim surround throne. Man driven out, man restored. Tree of life guarded, access to tree of life. Sorrow and suffering, no more sorrow. Nimrod founds Babylon, Babylon destroyed. God's flood to destroy evil. Satan's flood to destroy the Jews. The bow of God's promise, and the bow around God's throne. Sodom and Egypt, corruption and judgment. Spiritual Sodom and Egypt in Jerusalem. Enemies of Abraham's people and enemies of Abraham's seed. Marriage of the first Adam to Eve, and marriage of the second Adam, Christ, to the church. Man's dominion ceased, Satan's begins. Satan's dominion ends, and man's dominion restored. Here we have a perfect example of things we see in Genesis being reversed in the book of Revelation, and we see the sorrowful conception being reversed through a birth into glory in Revelation chapter 12. So this I call God's cosmic clock. I came across this completely by chance, if that's what you want to call it, by detailing in an Excel spreadsheet every conjunction that Jupiter and Saturn have had since the Great Conjunction in 7 BC. This was originally discovered by Johannes Kepler in 1600, and here you can see a diagram of his example of attempting to explain it. How it works is each 20 years or so, Saturn and Jupiter conjunct. So they don't conjunct very often. It takes about 60 years for them to form a full triangle. And each of the legs of the triangle I've got in a different color. And this is explained in a Harvard University article which I found. It says, successive Saturn and Jupiter conjunctions, this is stepping through the zodiac, develop an interesting pattern as they step around the ecliptic, as noted by Kepler. The pattern is more regular if one uses zodiacal signs of equal length instead of constellation boundaries. Saturn travels about 2/3 of its orbit, about 240 degrees, between conjunctions with Jupiter. If a conjunction occurs in the sign of Aries, the next will probably occur in Sagittarius, about 240 degrees away, and the third in Leo, about 240 degrees along the ecliptic. The fourth conjunction will likely also occur at Aries, so on the fourth conjunction the triangle is complete and it starts a new triangle. Since Saturn completes just over 2 orbital revolutions of the Sun during the 59 years covered by the 3 conjunctions. So you can see this clock moves slightly further and further along in an anti-clockwise direction. And here I have listed every major conjunction that has happened since the birth of Christ. And if we go from after the crucifixion, these conjunctions have occurred exactly 100 times. There have been 100 Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions since Christ. We are now coming up to the 101st conjunction, which is taking place in the sacrificial sign of Capricorn on the winter solstice, right before what I believe we can see in the heavens as mid-tribulation. Keep in mind, the next time that Saturn and Jupiter conjunct is going to be in 2040 in the sign of Virgo. So here we have a perfect clock telling us this thing has ticked 100 times. There have been 100 conjunctions. Or you could look at it as the triangle having moved 33 times. The whole triangle itself has moved 33 times in an anti-clockwise direction. And we know that Jesus Christ was crucified at 33. You couldn't make this up. If we take the conjunction precise average, because sometimes it's a little bit more than 20 years, sometimes it's a little bit less, but if you take the conjunction precise average, it comes up with 19.86 years. And that's also mentioned in this Harvard University article, which I will link to this video. 1,986 years added to 30 AD is 2017. The heavens declare the glory of God day unto day. They uttereth speech night unto night. They bringeth forth knowledge. This is telling us in a clock when the rapture of the church is. This is a second witness. Saturn makes its 70th orbit since Christ in 2024. The rapture of the church happening in 2017 on the Revelation chapter 12 sign matches up perfectly with Saturn concluding its 69th orbit in 2024. We have God's cosmic clock in the heavens telling us when the rapture of the church is. I'm going to try and demonstrate this clock between Jupiter and Saturn. What I've done is I've set the conjunction precise average, which is 19.86 years, and it's a bit difficult to demonstrate because, as I said, sometimes they meet at a little bit more than 20 years, sometimes it's a little bit less than 20 years, but the conjunction precise average is 19.86 years, which is fascinating because what it illustrates is that God has total control, and he's so precise with this, even though it's not exact, if you know what I mean. The science isn't exact, but yet he is exact, and 19.86 years is the conjunction precise average. So I'm going to go forward, and hopefully you can see. I'll probably have to slow this video up so that you can see this working. Here we go.